Welcome to the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. This is Eric Nusbaum, and I'm here with Adam MacKinnon, author of Baseball for Kids, A Young Fan's Guide to the History of the Game.
Happy to be here.
Happy to be here with you. I'm going to ask you, actually, before I even say the name of your book, what beer are you drinking right now?
So this is a local. I'm here in Atlanta, and this is a local brewery called Red Hare, and it's called SPF 50/50. It's a Radler with grapefruit in it because I liked fruity beers before it was cool.
Was it not cool before?
I think there was a point where it wasn't.
It was always cool to me.
Oh, well, that's sweet. You're out in California though, right?
Actually, I'm in Tacoma, Washington.
You're in Washington. Oh, you're on the West Coast. Yeah.
Country here. There's like 5 beer shops within walking distance of where I live, and I've never really gone to any of them. But I've only lived here a few months, so.
Oh yeah. You'll have your time.
All right. So you are our only children's book author,
mm-hmm.
and that's what we're going to talk about.
Cool.
The first question is, how did you decide to start working on a kid's book, and what kind of inspired you to go in that direction?
So my coming to the book is probably unique to a lot of other folks. The book was a rough idea of it was actually brought to me. So I was sort of, I had somebody that was reading my website, some of the work I was doing there, and said, "Hey, I was approached to write a kid's book, which I had never done. I'd never written.
Romantic about baseball.
Yes. Romanticaboutabaseball.com.
You got to get ready to promote yourself, man.
Yeah, right. That's right.
I was to do it for you, like me.
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't have started the kids book podcast with the beer discussion. Sorry about
that. No, it's cool. It's cool. I'm fledgling through all of this. It was funny that they came to me and not on my wildest dreams, in my heady, oh yes, I'm gonna, wax poetic on baseball, Ken Burns style, was a kid's book anywhere on my radar. But when they came to me, I was really intrigued by it. So I took on the project, and it was actually a lot more fun than it was a lot more interesting and a lot more fun than I initially thought.
What was your first thought about it? Was it like, that's scary, I have no idea how to write to a kid, or was it more like, kids, huh?
Yeah. Well, I have a 2-year-old. And so when it comes to, my initial thought was, I was actually kind of excited about it, because when I thought about it, I actually, immediately after they came to me, I looked into what kids' books are out there. And I found that a lot of kids' baseball books they don't always explore the history of the game. They kind of just pick a topic and then just say, here's what this is about, a very specific one. So I was really interested to write about something that in a few years that my daughter could read and actually learn about the history of the game and some important points along the way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I have two young sons. My older son's 5 in August. My younger son's 3 in a couple of weeks. And reading a lot of kids' books with them, you come to appreciate how hard it is to write a good kids' book, and how much thought and a different kind of energy has to go into the process of crafting that language. Was it easy for you to step into the kind of children's author voice and to you bring in a lot, and we'll get into this, a lot of history into this book. Was it easy to kind of naturally start to zoom in on certain things and simplify the language, or was that a challenge to figure out how to do?
That was absolutely a challenge. My editor and I went, several rounds of, this is good, but we need to kind of we need to kind of simplify it a little bit. And I think that was definitely a challenge it wasn't until, ironically, probably the last milestone, the last thing that I had to put together, where I got it within like 3 or 4 tries. Right, where I could just like, oh wait, okay, you don't need to explain this, and you can just kind of present it in a way that it just kind of present it to them and let them interpret it how they may. So it was definitely more of a challenge than I thought.
Did you read kids' baseball books when you were growing up?
No, as a matter of fact, I did not read I had always watched baseball. I had always really enjoyed baseball. I've been doing fantasy baseball since we drafted on paper. But I hadn't read, my first baseball book wasn't until probably like 4 years ago.
Wow.
Maybe, no, not even that long, because it was right before my daughter was born. Smart Baseball was my first baseball book.
Keith Law. That
Yes.
was your first baseball book. You had never read a single baseball book before that.
Not really, not like seriously. Like I would pick it up and then, like whatever. And then I would kind of, go away from it. But Smart Baseball was the first book I picked up, read through, and then I just couldn't get enough. And then from there, I have an entire bookshelf just devoted to baseball books.
What kind of books did you read as a kid?
I was really into fantasy books. I read, the Harry Potter books, Lord of the Rings. I've read Lord of the Rings to the point where I can recite it, by heart pretty much, and Tolkien chews up pages. So that was the gist of a lot of my reading when I was younger.
But Lord of the Rings is a slightly older age group than baseball for kids.
True. Slightly older.
Slightly older, a little more dense in the language.
Yes. I like to think that I don't spend 20 pages talking about the color of leaves.
No, are there any leaves? I don't think there are any leaves at all.
I don't think so. No.
Colors, but not leaves.
Yes, exactly.
So one thing that struck me about the book was the format. It was very, it was like structured. There was, you have kind of a little bit of information, and for everybody, the book is kind of a survey of baseball history for kids. So I, unlike Adam, as a kid, read a ton of baseball books, like baseball biography I can get my hands on, kids' baseball biographies, kids' baseball books. I never had a book like this, though, and at least that I can recall.
Right.
I feel like a lot of it was feeling my way through adult books that I didn't really understand, which left me with a probably very weird and like broken understanding of how baseball works. But this book, it kind of goes through, the history of the entire sport, and it breaks things down into like, here's a little bit of a description of the Deadball Era. Here's 3 good facts about it, and you're on to the next thing. And it's a survey, I guess, if you had to describe it. How did
that's a good
that structure come about? Was that something from your editors and your publisher, or was that your idea to do the kind of 1, 2, 3 outs?
So it was a little bit of both. It was mostly the concept was presented by the editor, and then I went in and basically took the content, just set the timeline in terms of what topics, how we were going to cover them, what type of format the pages were going to look like. You know what I mean? The idea was just to present these sorts of things, whether they were and leave it open ended, like kind of. And a lot of them, believe it or not, there's a lot of sections in the book, not a lot, but maybe a couple where it'll actually say, well, no one really knows, you know what I mean? And we establish a lot of open-ended things that kind of encourage kids, to say, hey, if I can keep your attention for 1 page, and maybe you'll ask a follow-up question. In my head, I saw a kid reading a page like about the Deadball Era, and then, turn to their parent and then say, oh, well, how would they really get a home run? You know what I mean? Who was the best pitcher during that time? The idea was to present it, give them enough information to formulate a question, and then just sort of continue the chain with an adult.
To spark a little bit of curiosity.
Yes.
Did you work with any kids in the writing of this book? Did you talk to any? You have a daughter who's 2. She's a little young for this. Especially, I imagine it was written a little bit ago.
Yeah.
did you kind of have, do you have nieces or nephews or friends that you could bounce ideas off of who happen to be like 7 years old?
I didn't actually. That was the scary part, is that like my sister has two kids, but they're, they're much younger. And so they're only maybe a couple years older than my daughter. And so it was a little bit flying blind with a lot of it. But I'm in my day job, I work with kids just a notch above. I work in music retail, and a lot of the kids that I work with are like 11. So they're like, sixth graders, where I get them set up with instruments for the coming year and things like that. And so I actually spent a lot of time talking to like 11-year-olds. So I just kind of like made a deduction of like, okay, what is the kind of things that I hear them talk about? And then maybe just take it like a step, not a step down, but kind of a step more vague, like a step broader.
That's an interesting way of putting it. So not down, but broader. One of the things I appreciated about this book, and my wife is an educator and she works with young kids, and she always will say that one of her mentors, I think, has this quote about children are more than just adults in training. Children are people too. And I think this book does a really nice job of speaking to children directly and not speaking down to them.
Thank you.
Was that something that you had in mind, kind of not like, here's what happened, blah, 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 lecturing, but sort of presenting it in a more, what do you think kind of way?
That was absolutely the mission from the jump. I am one of those people. I think that we underestimate children's comprehension abilities when we present ideas to them. And if we just, I'd almost like to talk to them and have them, again, the whole idea is to have them ask follow-up questions. I feel like if you pander to kids, they pick up on it, and then the interest level kind of drops off. So the idea was to present these sort of complex things, but in a way where they feel like part of the conversation. And if you feel like part of the conversation, you want to stay engaged. You want to ask follow-up questions. So that was the mission in my mind, and when writing it.
Was there one particular section that you were really excited about along those lines that you thought kids don't appreciate? We'll use it since we've been using it the Deadball Era enough. Kids need to really understand what it was like before Babe Ruth.
Right. The Negro Leagues, 100,000%. That was something that I was very grateful, because the one thing that, with baseball increasingly has an issue of accessibility, especially in communities of color, especially in urban communities. And so, talking about the Negro Leagues, talking about just seeing, for a kid to see someone in a book that for lack of a better term, looks like them, is so important to me. So that was the chapter, I think, when you got into the Negro Leagues, when you got into other parts of the book that kind of deal with the maybe not as straightforward. I think that was the chapter I was most excited to write about.
When you say not as straightforward, you mean kind of stuff that's controversial or stuff that...
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, one thing I really tugged back and forth with my editor on was the inclusion of the Black Sox. Yeah, because on one hand, and I understand where they were coming from, they didn't necessarily want to, cheating is a very complex thing for, to understand, but to me, it was so important to understand the for kids to see, like, this is a real, people always say, oh, you cheated. Well, this is a real example of that happened. And if that gets them to ask, follow-up questions, we have, it forces us to confront it.
Yeah, I think that actually, when I was reading it, what stuck out to me was that you had to just define gambling. Like, this is gambling. This is what gambling means. So you could explain what it was to throw a game. And that's
right.
It's not a thing that will even occur to me writing an adult book to define gambling, but it's a different process. Did you
Yeah.
train your brain a little bit to think in that way, or was that a kind of a working relationship with your editor that they would help you notice things that you were maybe not noticing yourself?
That one, that was a fly by the seat of my pants. Like cause they were like, hey, present it. And if it doesn't work, we're not going to do it. So it was like, okay. Um, so yeah, it was the way that I wanted to approach it was just like without going into gambling, like, cause if you just present it as, okay, they cheated, again, it kind of opens a broader conversation. Like, well, what is gambling? What does it mean to throw a game? Those sorts of things. So,
Or cheating, if you just say they cheated, you would think that they cheated to win. So that's usually like the
right.
goes, right? You think, oh, they cheated. That means they did some illegal stuff to try to win the game. But it was the opposite of that. It's way more complex.
Exactly. And so, and it goes back to the original premise where I'm kind of like, I almost would rather, the more you talk about the game, especially if like the game's not on, which it isn't right now, the more that I think we don't give kids enough credit for their genuine interest and curiosity in things. And if the reason you have a conversation about this is a book, you know what I mean? What better time? Like, is there a better backdrop to have that conversation than a colorful kids book about baseball? And you can teach a lot of life lessons, I think, using baseball as an accessible, easy to digest backdrop. And I think this is one that was easy to do.
One of the things that struck me about this book also is that it's a really big task to choose to curate baseball history, the entirety of it. It's so vast. And any one of the pages in this book could be an entire book. And I think probably almost all of them have. What were there things that you felt passionate about the Negro Leagues, about the Black Sox. There were some choices in there that were interesting to me as a reader, thinking, this person was not presented to me as a kid as being that important. Like Frank Robinson has a page in this book. And I thought, Frank Robinson, great player, first black manager, important person, but you don't hear about Frank Robinson that much. You hear about Mickey Mantle all the time, but Mickey Mantle is kind of not in this book that much. You get to make those kinds of choices to sort of reorient how somebody else will interpret the history of baseball. And these are things that will stick with them as they become fans and grow into their, interest or not interest in the game. Were there any kind of conscientious choices along those lines?
Yeah, Frank Robinson was one where I wanted to, like you said, there's no shortage of information and books on Mickey Mantle and things like that. What I was hoping to do with some of the choices, because you're right, if you ask me if I feel comfortable curating it, like you said, that's a good way to put it, curating baseball history, 1,000,000% not. Like so far in the extreme of not. I'd rather run NASA than try to curate, baseball. And I failed every science.
I'd rather have you curating baseball.
So for me, I think some of the choices that were made, I kind of deliberately wanted to go with, for lack of a better analogy, the same record, but the B side. I was thinking when you think of Mickey Mantle, you'll always be able to pull something out. But one thing that kind of I'll pick on Ken Burns for a second. You talk about, say, like Ken Burns baseball. You go back and you watch it and you think, man, there's just these amazing things that were just kind of glossed over. If there was another like a counter documentary that would pick on those, there's a whole another documentary in that.
Like the underground Ken Burns documentary.
Exactly. It's like, Burn Kens. And so what I'm thinking is, and that's what some of the choices that, like with Frank Robinson, where I was like, this is a guy it's going to come up on a baseball broadcast that these kids are watching somewhere. Like nobody's done this since Frank Robinson.
Sure.
And then what I want to happen is for the kids to be able to watch the game and think, oh, that guy was in the book, and so I know something about him.
That kind of ounce of familiarity that's like, oh yeah.
Yes, exactly. Some versatility in familiarity.
Was there something that you learned writing this book that surprised you?
Yeah, I didn't. I learned a lot about ballpark food, believe it or not. The fact that the origins of hot dogs at a ball game are just as murky as the origins of the game itself.
Just as just as murky as the origins of hot dogs or the
right. Even hot dogs that are made today, the origins are murky. Yeah, I think that was the thing that kind of surprised me the most, because a lot of I was able to kind of write and just sort of fact check myself as I went along the way. But like, yeah, the hot dog has a very mysterious arrival to baseball, and so that was the one thing that jumped out at me, all as mundane as it is.
Do you think there's a sequel in that?
The hot dog 2 reprocessed.
Oh man.
Yeah. I got reflux just thinking about it.
What about the hardest thing to leave out? Was there something that you really wanted in there and you had to cut?
This is going to sound really weird, but I really wanted to do something on the and I got to kind of allude to it in the Roberto Clemente part, but I really wanted to do more on the arrival, the really surge of Latin players in the 90s.
Oh, interesting.
I really wanted to do more with that because, you know, and I keep, you know, kind of backpedaling a little bit to earlier references, but, you know, representation, big deal. And the thing is that for a lot of kids, you know, again, it goes back to guys with the same last name, guys with the look like me. And I don't think that that sort of surge of players, that sort of arrival of the players outside of the Dominican Republic, well, the really cultivation of Dominican talent and the arrival of it, and Panamanian talent and things like that into the game changed it so much. But that I kind of, you know, I wish I could have done more, but I also understand that's also a lot to unpack too. So
was it hard to leave out every single Braves player?
Excruciating. But, you know, I didn't want to teach the kids about like, you know, disappointment that early on in their lives. You know what I mean? So, yeah. That was tough, but I also was like, you know, I'm going to let the kids grow up, depending on their fan base. If they're Braves fans, I'm going to let them grow up and experience that on their own.
So one of the things I noticed, and I read the book today with my son, some of it, my son is 5 in August, and he's a big baseball fan. I mean, he's obsessed with hitting home runs.
Nice.
And he's a product of the modern baseball era.
Of course, three true outcomes kid.
So actually, we were playing in the backyard, and he told me that if he hits the ball at the middle, that's a foul now. Off the middle is a foul. That's not even a hit.
Oh, okay.
It's worth like considering a single at the middle. So one player that like the page that sparked his attention the most was Rickey Henderson.
Oh yeah.
And it was really funny actually. He was looking at a picture, his colored photos in the book, and we were reading it on a computer screen. And he thought that the picture of Rickey Henderson would be a video, and he really wanted to watch Rickey Henderson run. And it occurred to me that, okay, no, this is a PDF. This is not a video.
Right.
I can go to YouTube and I can pull up hundreds of hours of Rickey Henderson clips. So we did that. We watched Rickey Henderson for a while. And history and baseball history is so much more accessible now to kids than it was to you and me when we were kids. Like, if somebody told me stories about Willie Mays, like I could wait until he showed up on ESPN Classic at like 3:00 in the morning if I was lucky.
Right.
Told me to watch it. Like, but now Rickey Henderson, who, God, this makes me feel old, but like Rickey Henderson to my son is like Willie Mays was to me in terms of when they played. He's right there at the push of a button. Did you think at all about the kind of different relationship that kids now have to the past and to sort of history with technology? And also, this is a two-part question and they're both long. And did you think at all about how much more baseball history there is now than there would have been a generation ago, and all these kind of new players who I don't think of Rickey Henderson as a historic baseball player. I think of him as like a guy I watched growing up.
Mm-hmm.
But he is obviously a historic baseball player. Did you think about that too?
So to the first part of your question, I think that part of one of the things that I wanted to do was kind of hold the hand of the kids as they go through this and say, with the anticipation that they're going to go to the internet, they're going to want to see more. And your son's, a perfect example there where, if you want to see something kind of unique, yeah, you can go to YouTube and watch Rickey Henderson, steal bases all day long. I mean, I can watch Andrelton Simmons, make outs like magical. You know what I mean? It stings a little bit. Anything after that, yeah, it stings a little bit. But what I think that I wanted to do was kind of like at least set guideposts along the way, because it goes again. You can queue up any baseball highlight video and watch someone hit dingers all day. You know what I mean? You can watch David Ortiz rip it over, the pesky pole all you want, but not everyone is immediately going to think my favorite play in baseball is the stolen base. I think it's beautiful. And of course, Rickey Henderson has an unreplicatable, in my opinion, record for what's going on. So I kind of wanted to guide the kids, knowing they were going to, or hoping they would follow up on whatever they saw. And I'll go back to the Frank or Roberto Clemente. They talk. I think I made an allusion to how strong his arm was in the book. So I want like a kid say, well, what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? And I know it's like grainy footage, but you look it up and there's, Clemente just throwing BBs across the field. So that's the first part. The second part, I need you to kind of run that by me one more time.
God, I don't even know if I remember what it is. Oh yeah, it was more about the thought of kind of there's more baseball history now than there was before. And is it hard to put players into context as historical figures that maybe you grew up watching?
Yes, it was. It was because, for example, for me, like, boy, it was hard not to write anything about Greg Maddux. Like just growing up watching Maddux and Glavine and Smoltz and all that. Like, but on the other end, I think it after a certain point, once the ball kind of got rolling, I almost did feel like almost like a journalistic obligation to sort of step back from my own sort of preferences or biases or my own sort of thoughts on these players and just say like, look, these guys to me are integral for a young person to not just get into the game, but get into it from a different perspective. I want to be able to, as kids, to take away something from my book that they won't get somewhere else. So that's kind of where I could.
Did you read other contemporary baseball kids books much in your research? You kind of alluded to that before, but did you do a lot of sort of poking around the library kids section?
A little bit. There was a couple things that I picked up, and it kind of helped me. I'm just being completely honest. I think it was like, I actually think I read one of the Ballpark mystery books for like just kind of leafed through it a little bit, just kind of make sure the dialogue was at least, somewhat there. But I really wanted to approach it with a different kind of perspective. Because again, I didn't know enough about kids' books to know what a good vernacular to use was. So I almost just approached it and, just kind of threw it in there. And if it stuck, it stuck.
Trial and error.
It was. And it was a lot of error.
Even the best hitters only succeed 3 out of 10 times, to use a good baseball cliche.
Yes.
Would you have any advice to somebody else who's interested in writing a kid's book before they start? That's something that you wish you did?
I think something I wish I had done is I wish I had spent more time with kids. Almost like I wish I was able to like sort of pick things up from them, like have them read a book similar to mine, or like, pick a book that's closest to what I wanted to achieve and watch their reactions to it.
Like focus group them almost.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That was the word I was looking for. I almost wish I had focus grouped kids, because you just don't know. Like, you get through something, and in your adult developed mind, or mine's mostly developed, like you get to the end of the thought and you think, yes, this covers everything. And then you read it back like a month later and you're like, no, this is not. So
that's happened to me in my adult book. So
yes, exactly. I think the best advice I can give someone is don't overthink it, in the sense of like, don't think they won't understand it. Give them more credit than they're due.
Have you gotten any good questions from kids since you wrote the book and published it?
I haven't yet, although I have gotten a couple of school teachers that have asked for copies.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
You are not actually allowed to be around anybody, and neither am I. Well, you're in Georgia, so you technically are now.
Well,
we are called the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. These are strange
true.
The books are maybe out in the world, but we're not really out in the world.
Right. Could and should are very, subjective terms.
Fair enough. I'm not bringing any political judgments to this chat.
Neither am I.
All right. Have you read it to your daughter yet?
So yeah, actually, believe it or not, my daughter, when they arrived, when the advanced copies arrived, she loves boxes. Like, so she picks up a box and there's a book. So she runs over, she sits down, she's 2, she can't read yet. And she's going through and she found my picture in the back. So now it's just, she doesn't understand any of it other than it's daddy book. And, I have sneakily used that as a way I took Disney Plus off for a few minutes and was able to watch some baseball. So she knows what baseball is. Like, she'll point and say baseball.
That's cool.
I'm like, yeah, that's fantastic. But
you like KBO?
Yeah, so I haven't watched enough KBO yet. But I am YouTubing. I'm YouTubing like old like Braves games so that she can kind of like get a feel, because I already know what's going to happen. So the mood stays somewhat level.
We watched. My wife's a big Mariners fan, and watched the '95 ALDS Game 5. Edgar Martinez double game.
Yeah,
like 4 or 5 innings of it the other day, and it was great. It was, what's going to happen. The greatest moment in Mariners history, which is kind of sad in itself. But yeah. It was very exciting to be like, hey, watch this. Ken Griffey Jr. is about to hit a home run. Right.
It's my wife still, and I understand why. She doesn't quite wrap her head around me watching games that I already know the outcome. But to me, it's like, if you watch the right game, it's like watching a movie. You know what I mean? Like 2011 Game 6, 2016 Game 7, 2015 Game 1. Like, you watch these games, and it's just like, oh man, I know what's about to happen, but it's still so good.
I'm trying to think of all those different games. What was the game where they left Craig Kimbrell in the bullpen in Dodger Stadium?
2013 game.
Oh yeah,
20. That was so. I have in the little shelf behind me, there's 3 signed baseballs. One of them is Andrew Jones. The other is a one I won on a radio contest from Mark Lemke. And
That's a true Brave guy.
Hey, Mark Lemke is my favorite player. And it actually, he's personalized it. It says almost 91 World Series MVP. Because if they won, he would have been the MVP. And the last one is the guy who threw the pitch, Eric Carpenter. And I don't know, I got it as a sympathy gift from an employee that was late for work. He said, I know you like the Braves. Here's a signed baseball. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. So I have that guy's signature.
Did the guy keep his job because of that?
No chance. No chance. I mean, if he got me a Kimbrel ball, yeah, maybe.
That's a lesson that Freddie Gonzalez probably should have learned that year.
Yeah. I actually wrote something on that, and I called it "Leaving the Gun in the Holster."
Oof. All right, we are off topic. But
Sorry, we have rambled.
I think we're probably about through. Is there anything else I should know, the world should know about baseball for kids?
Read it with your kids. Read it with them. And the point of the book is not to explain baseball to your kids. It is to introduce baseball to your kids.
I like that. Be ready to answer some questions based on my experience. This book is, this is a great endorsement. It is designed calculatingly, it seems like, after talking to you, to make your kids ask you questions about baseball that you might not know the answers to.
Yeah. It's the old gotcha.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Adam. The book is Baseball for Kids. It's great. If you have kids, get it for them. If you know kids, get it for them. If you don't have kids or no kids, get it for yourself. You'll still learn something.
Why not? It's colorful. It looks good on the bookshelf. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for doing this.